Hi, welcome to iRanza Insights, real talk about childhood emotional abuse. I am Jasmine Hollis, founder and president of iRanza Corporation, where we raise awareness of childhood emotional abuse and provide tools for healing. I'm here today with Dr. Donna Oriowo, the owner and lead therapist of Nod Right, a mental health service in Largo, Maryland. Her practice focuses on the mental and sexual health of Black women. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me.
So as my first question, what do you do specifically? What is your practice?
I am a sex and relationship therapist in the Washington, D.C. metro area. We work mostly with adults on sort of overcoming childhood sexual abuse and really just trying to reclaim their own sexuality for themselves.
Why
with a focus, of course, on colorism and texturism and how that impacts mental and sexual thing.
Okay. Why choose to become a therapist?
There were many reasons, one of which was just that people continued to tell me their business regardless of whether or not I asked. So I thought I should get some training so that I could do a better job. But the other piece is there are so many hurts, especially in the Black community and in communities of color, that I wanted to be a resource for helping to heal those hurts, to help us to achieve the life that we imagine for ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with first resolving and healing from the things that we received when we were younger or even in present day.
You talked about how you work with adults who perhaps have experienced sexual abuse in their childhood. What sort of role does that tend to play in their adult lives?
Everything that happens when we're kids still matters when we're adults. I think that some people like to imagine that you turn 21 or 25 or 30 and that some magic flip is switched and now all of a sudden the things that happened to you back then no longer have a root or take effect. And that couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth. When it comes to sexual abuse in particular, I have a more expansive view and definition of than what some people may say qualifies. So generally speaking, people, when they think of sexual or even sexual abuse, they're thinking specifically of touch, of what someone can do or not do with their bodies in a sexual manner. And I'm thinking beyond that, because sex is what you do, but sexuality ends up being a lot of who you are. So I'm taking it from a sexuality abuse sort of perspective, whereas everything about you, the expansive pieces of you, the smallest pieces of you can be abused. So in that case, it's more than just what someone does to your body. It's also what someone says about your body, says about your being, whether or not they see you, treat you as a valuable and worthy human being. I think that these things constitute a sexuality-based abuse and should be treated as such, because the things that we hear when we're younger still matter to us when we're older. Sometimes we pushed it away so well that we don't think that it has an effect, but really it just has a more insidious effect on how we relate to ourselves as well as how we relate to others.
So it's often hard to identify, you said. So how can one come to realize that they do need help for stuff that's happened in their past?
Honestly, the first step in anything is recognizing that there is a problem. But if you are in a space where you're refusing to see that there is a problem, then help is beyond your reach. So just knowing that the patterns of behavior that you're having, like, okay, you get mad super easily at your boss, or you're all up in your feelings about whomever you're in a relationship that doesn't quite fit right. It doesn't feel good to be in that relationship, and I mean any relationship. So romantic partnerships, yes, but I'm also talking about family relationships. I'm talking about friendships, that if it doesn't feel good for you to be there, if there is no pleasure received from being in that space, if you constantly are left feeling bad about yourself, you're probably not in the healthiest of relationships. And noting that that is a problem can be your first step toward moving towards something more.
So, having these effects play out from childhood into adult life, what might that mean for the way an adult might treat any children they may have?
Whew. So, how we respond to trauma, to our emotional hurts, our physical even hurts from childhood, and how we then deal with other people is so very different. It's like hugely varied. On the one end, you could say, oh, I'm never going to treat my child like this, and go in the opposite direction of everything that you've ever received. But more times than not, what happens is there's a mimicking. So you might do the exact same thing and come to a space where it's like, well, now I understand why my mom, dad, aunt, sister, brother, whomever did what they did. Right. So a lot of times we tend to repeat patterns rather than break them. But going opposite or going along with it basically means the same thing to me, which is that this thing has such a hold on you that it has dictated what your behavior was going to be, to go 100% opposite or to just keep going along with it. When we get to a place where we're able to confront it, to examine it, and really then make a choice for ourselves of what we would like to do. It may include some of the things that we received, because even broken clocks are right twice a day. And it may still include some of those things that we deem to be opposite of what we got. But now we're actually making a choice instead of just reacting to what it was.
Do you see, or you talked about colorism and how that sort of plays into it. So, what what does that look like exactly? How does that manifest?
Colorism in childhood. So having someone tell you that you're too dark, your hair is too kinky, that, oh, you would be pretty if, or, oh, you're so pretty to be dark skin. And on the other end, color-based prejudice, which is different from colorism, which is what happens to lighter skinned folk. Oh, you're not black enough. Oh, you think you all that. These type of things, these messages that we receive, they can impact, number one, how we feel about ourselves. So some people find that they don't think that they're worthy of good relationships, or that all they have to offer anybody is their skin tone or their hair texture. So there's that piece, that this is all I have to offer. So it becomes reductive. You don't have anything else. You just become your features in a lot of ways. And how it ends up playing out in romantic relationships, especially, since I see a lot of those, my partner only chose me because I'm light skinned, or my partner has always dated light skinned people and now they're dating me, or now they're marrying me and I don't understand why they chose me. It can lead to emotionally, physically, or mentally abusive relationships, because if you think you deserve less, if you have low self-esteem because of it, it can impact the type of relationships that you tolerate, that you get into, how long you stay, and what you allow this person to then bring into your life. It can impact friendships. Oftentimes people feel like they are not being seen fully for who they are and what their experiences have been by those who they count as their friends. It can also mean that sometimes we try to be friends with people that we don't think are as cute as us, so that we can stand out a little bit more, and we can even tolerate abuse within those friendships. Where it comes to family, sometimes families continue in the same rhetoric that they had been when you were younger. Oh, light skin this, dark skin that. So then any children that you may bring forth then become subject to the same sort of hurts that you already experienced. So it shows up in everything, because as far as I'm concerned, if it shows up in self-esteem, then it shows up everywhere, because the only thing that doesn't show up I mean, you show up absolutely everywhere that you go. You bring yourself, which means you bring your self-esteem. And that colors how we look at ourselves. It colors how we look at other people. It colors how we look at the world.
So when we end up in relationships that perhaps are abusive like that, how do we start to have conversations with those people about the abuse we're experiencing or that they may be experiencing from us, those kinds of things?
Those conversations can be tricky because if we're talking about physical abuse, then now we're talking about the level of safety of even being able to have those conversations. Like, are you going to be physically safe, mentally safe, and emotionally safe to bring this up? Or are they going to gaslight you? Are they going to hit you? Because in which case, it may not be safe for you to actually have that conversation. But if you can get some level of safety, I usually suggest that people go to therapy because having a third party who is uninvolved in your day to day, I think can help both parties to be able to get, or both or multiple parties, however many people are in this relationship, to be able to get some perspective of what they are doing and how their partner is receiving it. It can also give you some help on how to move away from that behavior if both people or if all people are actually interested in that movement.
In terms of getting therapy, what sorts of barriers might people see when trying to get a therapist?
Cost often is one of the biggest barriers to therapy. People are not as educated on how to use insurance, even for an out of network therapist, as I think that folks should be. But it's not in insurance companies or anyone else's benefit to tell you about all that when it means additional work or additional payouts. So really trying to circumvent the money problem in therapy is one of the bigger problems. Where it comes to folk of color, I find that they tend to want to see other people of color, but there are not as many people of color therapists as there are people who are seeking therapy, which then puts it into a position of a running out of resources. And then it depends on where you live, of course. So I live in the Washington, D.C. metro area. So I'm in the DMV. I am licensed in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, which gives more people access to therapy from me as an individual. However, if you live somewhere like Kentucky, you may have fewer folk available to see you. So, I mean, so licensing and how licensing works, depending on what someone's license is in. So marriage and family um, counselors, social workers, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we don't have countrywide licensing. So you are only licensed in your space, which means that if you live in a space that has mostly white folk and white therapists, then the resources for therapists of color are way down. And we have to stick with people who are in the states that we are licensed in, which makes it more difficult. So I consider that to also be a barrier. And I think the final barrier, if I'm going for my top three, then the third barrier for me would be that people who don't realize that they have a problem are not seeking solutions to it. So some folks don't think that they have a problem. They think that they turned out okay, even while they're anxious, even while they're depressed, even while they hate huge, large chunks of their lives. They still think that they're okay. And if they think they're okay, they won't seek help, but they will certainly perpetuate the same stuff that they've already received and hurt others.
Is there a way to help people who aren't aware that they have a problem to realize it, to kind of let them know whether or not they might need help?
I think more people living their best lives, who are living and normalizing therapy, who are living in a way that feels good and authentic to them, who are able to show up in spaces, allows more people to see where they are and are not living authentically, where they are and are not being themselves. And then they start to feel uncomfortable with that. And it's in that discomfort that people tend to seek help. So mostly when other people around you are well, you will want to be well as well.
So I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but just want to expand on it a bit. Do you see emotional abuse in general affecting different populations, such as based on race, socioeconomic status, gender identity, etc., to a greater or less extent?
Emotional abuse is running rampant out here in these streets. It's way too much. I would say that emotional abuse is both interpersonal as well as intrapersonal. So specifically, I'm thinking that we have to also include systems of oppression and how they gaslight you and emotionally abuse people. So by the time you add that in as well as interpersonal experience, then for me, it's the people who are most marginalized are also being more likely to me to be those who are most likely to be emotionally abused as well. So we're talking of color, disabled, um, fat, dark skin, the people who are at the intersections, LGBTQIA, and just on and on and on. The most oppressed among us is also likely to be the one who is being most emotionally abused by systems as well as by people.
So if people aren't able to get counseling, what would you say, what are ways by which people can form healthy boundaries and develop a healthy mental state on their own?
I think that the resources out here are amazing these days. So books, and more books. Finding the books that at the very least start to make sense to you, and note that of course that there is no such thing as objective, so people are only going to be able to give their subjective opinions even in the books that you're reading, but being able to pull out the things that actually mean something for you. I personally believe in using social media, and I think that people look at me like I'm nuts when I say that, but use social media. There are therapists are on social media, and they are posting things that are in alignment with what it is that they already believe as far as mental health, and they give great nuggets and help all the time. So definitely get on Twitter, get on Instagram, use TikTok. A lot of these, like I said, a lot of us are out there already doing the work so that even more people are able to benefit from our knowledge and our skill set. So take advantage of that. So between the books and the therapist that you can have in your pocket right there on your social media, you can still be getting some things done and at a relatively low cost. I know for one, we answer questions that people have about sexuality on Mondays, sexuality and relationships every Monday. I give a therapy tidbit on most Thursdays. We are pulling quotes from other therapists from all these other places, and we are constantly sharing new and interesting info. And if you're following a lot of different therapists, or a lot of different accounts that speak to certain things, then you're going to be able to get some knowledge, and you're going to get it for FREE, which is my favorite price. And it can also serve as a good supplemental tool for those who are already in therapy. So yeah, I think that's one way to be able to get some of that help and subvert the cost of everything. Did I answer your question? I feel like there was another part.
What would you say is the most important first step, I guess, in developing a healthy sense of self?
Recognizing when you have a problem. If you're able to recognize when something is amiss, whether it feels amiss in your body or you're noting that you're feeling anxious in your mind, if you know that there's a problem, you have the tools that you need to resolve that problem. So seek it out.
Cool. Thank you so much. That's all the questions I had.
All right.